I remember the moment it all changed, like the sound of a distant thunder becoming a roar, not because of what I saw first, but because of what I felt in my bones, a pull inside me telling me that today was no ordinary flight. Today the sky was not a routine path between 2 points. Today it was going to become a battlefield where limits were tested, trust was questioned, and humanity was weighed against orders. My name is Captain Sarah Walker, and on the morning we lifted off from the forward airbase, my mission was clear. Provide air support, maintain altitude, stay out of direct combat, and wait for further instructions. The commander's voice was calm but firm over the radio. Stay in the air, do not engage directly, maintain assigned altitude. But I could feel that invisible tug in my chest, the one that tells you when protocol is no longer enough, when rules meant for peace must bend to protect life. Little did I know that hours later I would face a decision with consequences that would separate obedience from courage. And in that separation I would redefine what it means to be a pilot, a protector, and a human being. We were cruising at 20,000 feet, the sun above us like a blazing shield cutting across the horizon. And below, the village lay like a speck of earth stitched together with dirt roads and crumbling structures that had once been homes of laughter, of dinners and morning lights. The intel had mentioned a non-combatant area, but intel is never as honest as the dirt beneath your wheels or the smoke in the air. I scanned the instruments, monitoring fuel flow, altitude, communication signals, but my eyes kept drifting down through the portholes of the C-17, drawing lines between clouds and noticing movement that shouldn't have been there. Silhouettes, small but unmistakable. Families, women clutching children, eyes looking skyward with hope and fear in equal measure. And that's when the first flare lit up the ground, a thin rocket trail heading straight for the village center. The warning lights in the cockpit began their ritual dance. Blink, 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 small crimson indicators that portended much larger consequences. My co-pilot stared at the screen, then at me. "Captain," he said, voice steady but eyes wide. "That's ground fire. They're targeting the village." I felt a tightening in my chest. Never had I seen such a clear manifestation of danger to innocence below with my own eyes through the cockpit. My mind flashed with all the training, all the protocols, the phrases drilled into me since flight school. Maintain altitude, hold position, do not engage unless fired upon directly, wait for command. But the village wasn't just a target area anymore. It was a living, breathing community under siege, and as the second round of tracer fire streaked upward and the ground shook with explosions, my instinct screamed that orders were no longer written in stone. Orders were obstacles between life and death. I keyed the intercom, not because I expected acquiescence from protocol, but because those below deserved to hear that someone saw them, heard them, and would act for them. "This is Captain Walker," I said, voice firm despite the turmoil inside. "We are witnessing hostile fire on a civilian area. They need immediate evacuation support." There was a pause over the radio, a static-filled moment where silence felt like the enemy. And then came the reply from command. "Negative, Walker. Maintain current position. Do not descend. Those are orders." And for a moment I froze, not because of doubt, but because the weight of obedience hammered against my ribs like a hammer against metal. Obedience. A word we live by in the military, a pillar of structure and survival. But when orders begin to expose the innocent to harm, obedience becomes a burden too heavy to carry. Below, the village was erupting into chaos. I could see smoke curling upward, thin at first, then thickening like dark fingers clawing at the sky. People were scattering, mothers pulling children, elderly dragging belongings, men shielding the vulnerable, and all of them believing, at least for a moment, that someone above cared enough to act. The sight rooted itself inside me like a seed of fire, a fire that demanded action, not deliberation. And so, against direct orders, I made the choice that would define the rest of that day and echo through the rest of my life. I turned to my co-pilot, eyes locked with his. "We are descending." "Full approach," I said, flat and unemotional in tone, but every muscle in my body vibrating with purpose. The descent began, the C-17 lumbering downward like a colossal bird of steel, committing itself to a ground it had been trained to avoid unless commanded otherwise. Alarm bells chimed in the cockpit, warnings of structural stress, warnings of altitude protocols breached, warnings of 1,000 reasons not to do what I was doing. But still I continued, because there was something deeper than warnings guiding my hand. The knowledge that people live, love and hurt and sometimes survive because someone chooses empathy over orders. The first moments of descent were violent. The air pulled at the fuselage, attempting to shove us back up, to challenge our trajectory. Below, the village grew larger, more detailed. Huts, broken walls, trucks overturned, and everywhere movement like ants scattering from an overturned hill. And then came the unmistakable danger, bullets whistling past like angry wasps, explosions erupting in craters of dust and sparks that flew toward us with lethal intent. The C-17 is not a fighter jet. It is not designed to dodge ground fire like a nimble aircraft. It is a transport, a massive bastion of human payload and steel meant for lifting heavy loads calmly, not diving into chaos. But there we were, descending into the mouth of fire, and I realized something precious. Courage isn't found in comfort, it's found in the decision to step into fire for others. As we edged closer to the ground, I could hear the collective breath of the crew, not spoken but felt, heavy and synchronized with every judder of the fuselage. The village below was under direct assault, and people were running, some toward us, some away, but all moving with the same frantic hope that someone who saw them would act, that someone above recognized their plight, and would accept the risk that most would consider unreasonable. And that's when I made a decision even bolder. Rather than a quick descent and rise, I committed to a landing approach, not for extraction alone, but for presence, for visibility, for sending a message that we wouldn't leave them to fate. The ground was uneven, littered with debris from shattered lives, but there was a stretch of field that might let us touch down if the descent was perfect, if the wind held steady, and if no hostile fire struck a critical control surface at the wrong moment. My hands tightened on the controls, sweat beading on my brow, despite the cool blast of recycled air against my face. Shadows of smoke danced across the cockpit glass, flickering like firelight against a dark canvas, and I realized that the next moments would either carve our names into stories of salvation or annihilation. Trouble came fast. The first round struck near the wingtip, a loud metallic clang reverberating through the hull. Sparks erupted outside like stars detonating in slow motion. The instinct of survival whispered for me to pull up, to retreat, to obey the original command and escape the danger, but the instinct of compassion roared louder. I pushed through the shaker, kept the nose low, and maintained vector toward the open ground. Bullets slapped against metal like fists pounding a door. Explosions bloomed in the distance like poisonous flowers, but through it all I continued to breathe, calculate, and act, because hesitation at this point was as deadly as enemy fire. Below, figures were moving toward us. Some with weapons, some with empty hands, all with eyes locked skyward as if salvation or doom would descend from above. The villagers ran between broken walls and overturned carts, lifting children high, waving arms, calling names, hoping someone would hear them. Orders crackled in my earpiece again, distant voices demanding adherence to rules of engagement and threats of reprimand for unauthorized dissent. But those voices were severed by the roar of my conviction. I was no longer following a protocol. I was following a moral imperative, and in that imperative lay an undeniable truth. I could not turn away. The wheels touched down with a violent jolt that threw every occupant forward, dust and debris launching into the air like titans in conflict. The engines screamed as we fought for control, but the landing had begun, and in that moment every second was a lifetime compressed into shockwaves. I shouted, not because I needed to be heard, but because the vibration of voices has a way of grounding reality in chaos. "Everyone out! Move! Now!" Civilians spilled out of the open cargo ramp with frantic urgency, some falling, others helping each other up, the dust clinging to their clothes like a badge of survival, their eyes wide as if they couldn't believe that someone had come for them. I stayed put in the cockpit for a breath longer than necessary, watching every person escape harm's reach, counting them as they gathered at a distance we had marked as safer ground. And when the final child, a girl no more than 7, clutching a tattered doll, made it to safety, I felt the tension inside me unravel like a rope slowly untying. 97 lives counted, 97 futures preserved, and all because of a decision that dared to override orders, because obedience is admirable, but empathy is transformative. Later, after the smoke settled and medical teams arrived, and the reporters began asking questions about protocol and risk and chain of command, I stood with the villagers under a sky that no longer felt hostile, and I realized something profound. Orders can protect the many in times of calm, but in times of crisis, orders must bow to principle, must bow to the heart's clarity, must bow to the truth that some moments demand choice, not compliance. And so, if you ever find yourself questioning whether to follow the crowd or listen to what your judgment screams is right, remember this: humanity isn't defined by obedience to rules, but by courage to save others when those same rules threaten to leave them behind. And if you've ever had to make that choice, comment below with "Junta courage over protocol," because stories like this are more than memories. They are proof that compassion under fire changes everything.